Welcome back to United Taste of America and to one of my favorite states and one of the most unique places to eat anywhere in the United States, the great state of Louisiana. There was a movie when I was in college called The Way We Were. It was a classic movie with Robert Redford and Barbra Streisand, and Redford's best friend in the movie was played by an actor named Bradford Dillman, and they would play this game called Best, which was really favorite. You know, it was best day, best year, best month. That was a synonym for favorite. Well, you heard me talk about Ohio. My favorite dish ever is the veal stuffed peppers from Johnny's. Later, when we talk about Alabama, I'm going to talk about my favorite chef in the world. His name is Frank Stitt. And today, though, we're talking about my favorite state in the Union for food, and that's the great state of Louisiana. God, where do you even begin? There's so much culinary history. There's so many dishes. So I'm going to go really fast with the history of the state. Like almost all states, there were lots of indigenous people in Louisiana. Louisiana was first explored and settled by the French in 1682. Unlike the Midwest, where the French came down from Canada, the French came from the Caribbean to New Orleans. A lot of the settlers came from the island of Haiti. And when there was a revolution in Haiti, when the slaves had a revolt in Haiti, a lot of the French Creole people settled in Louisiana, in New Orleans. Interestingly, it originally was settled by the French, but it was given to the Spanish in 1763. Then it came back to the French in 1800. And then what happened? Mr. Napoleon ran out of money fighting wars in Europe, and he sold Louisiana and all of the rest of the United States west of the Mississippi to Thomas Jefferson in the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And again, I mentioned the Haitian revolt drove a lot of what we call Creole people. Creole people are, in many cases, mixed indigenous peoples, island peoples, African peoples, and French peoples that create this unique culture and cuisine called Creole. Louisiana became the 18th state in 1812. It's famous. We talked about it, Tennessee, about the famous Battle of New Orleans in 1814. Now, this was a huge slave state, a lot of enslaved people, and on the backs of enslaved people created enormous wealth in Louisiana from cotton, rice, and sugar cane. A lot of people, if you go to Louisiana, they still grow sugar cane. It's one of the few places in America where we grow cane and make cane syrup, and ultimately, cane syrup can lead to molasses, which can lead to things like rum and other things. It also was very famous because of the shipping center. Things from the Midwest came down the Mississippi River. The mouth of the Mississippi River empties into the Gulf of Mexico, where in New Orleans. So you're making money on the back of slaves that are growing all kinds of crops, but you're also making money in the shipping industry, riverboats, tugboats, the river culture of the state of Louisiana, because they would take goods there that would then be transferred around the world. Then came the Civil War, though, and the Civil War created an enormous amount of poverty. But what brought Louisiana back was they found oil in the Gulf of Mexico, and so much of Louisiana became an oil refiner state, an oil producing state. Unfortunately, created a lot of pollution. They're beginning to clean some of that up, but we continue to extract oil out of the Gulf of Mexico, and it has made, in many cases, lots of people in Louisiana lots and lots and lots of money. They also, because of understanding how to build boats that would operate in the marshes, there was a technology that led to the very famous boats of the Second World War called the Higgins boats. You know the Higgins boats because those were the boats that landed at Normandy, that opened up and then you came out and you were immediately in the water and immediately going to the beach. All of the Higgins boats were built in the port of New Orleans during the Second World War. What drives a lot of the economy of Louisiana today? Tourism. New Orleans is a very famous tourist city, a lot of tourist places throughout the state of Louisiana. New Orleans is probably one of the most unique cities in all of America. The architecture is largely Spanish, with wrought iron and all that from that Spanish era. It's got a French Creole feel to it, high ceilings, ceiling fans to try to catch the wind that came out of the Caribbean architectural style, and then amazing food. Look, folks, there's great food in all 50 states, but probably the best food in all of the country is from Louisiana. I actually have an old magazine article that's called New Orleans on 6 meals a day. And we laugh about it, but it takes about 6 meals a day to be able to do that. New Orleans is the ultimate gumbo. See, it's this melting pot of all of these cultures that came through. First of all, we're the Native Americans, and they had things like sassafras that from the tree that thickened a lot of stews and sauces and that kind of stuff. They grew corn, and a lot of corn dishes that come out of that. They grew a squash called a Merleton squash that the Native Americans grew that's very unique to Louisiana, that grows in the spring. It's really a great dish. Then the Creoles, what did they bring? They brought sausage, all kinds of sausages, sauces, shrimp Creole, etouffees, king cakes, beignets, French bread. Now, the great French bread was usually baked by Germans, which is kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? French bread. The famous Leidenheimer bread in New Orleans is a German family. Leidenheimer bread is my favorite bread in the world. It's crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside. It's the perfect basin to hold great po' boys with that. How about pralines, which is caramelized or sugar cane molasses covered pecans? It doesn't get much better than that. And then you have the classic, French dishes of the French Quarter at places like Galatoire's and Antoine's and Arnaud's, like trout meuniere or oysters bienville or pompano, or all kinds of amazing dishes, all from that Creole thing. The Spanish really brought what we call the Holy Trinity in Southern cooking. Originally, the Holy Trinity was a thing called sofrito: onions, carrots, celery. We substituted carrots for what? Bell peppers. So the Holy Trinity of Louisiana cuisine is onions and green peppers and celery that are all sautéed. The Cajuns, who were they? They were French from Acadiana in Canada. They had settled in Nova Scotia. They were persecuted by the Brits. They were kicked out of Nova Scotia. There's the famous Longfellow poem called Evangeline, about the Evangeline oak, about being sent down the Mississippi River. And they settled in an area where nobody would bother them, in the swamps. And the Cajuns, they brought with them cattle. First time cattle had come to Louisiana. And from the cattle, they started making dishes like dirty rice and boudin. They grew and harvested crawfish. You got jambalaya. You got andouille sausage. You got meat pies. And so you've got this great, Cajun cuisine. What did the African enslaved people bring with them? Okra, red beans and rice, peanuts, yams. Sugarcane was actually brought to New Orleans in the 1750s by Jesuits, by priests, as a cash crop that they thought they could teach the Native Americans. Now, remember, sugarcane really was growing in the Caribbean, Barbados primarily, other Caribbean islands, and the Jesuits that had come, again, the French Jesuits that had settled in Haiti, where they grow sugarcane, had brought sugarcane to Louisiana. Then At the turn of the century into the 1900s, you had the Great Migration where 2/3 of Italians left Italy and went to Australia or South America, but most came again here. A lot of them came in not through the port city of New York, but through the port city of New Orleans. And so most of the New Orleans Italians were all Sicilians. And there are more Sicilians, direct descendants of Sicilians, in New Orleans than any other city in the country except for New York. What did they bring? Tomato sausage. Progresso was started in New Orleans. The central grocery, the grocery industry in New Orleans was all run by Italians. And if you go to New Orleans and you go to Canal Street and you go to the central grocery, you get the famous muffaletta sandwich, which is a classic Italian sandwich. One of my favorite restaurants in New Orleans is a place called Pascal Manali's, and they do barbecue shrimp there. Again, this was combining cultures, but largely with Italians. Then there was an Italian family that came out of Chicago, and they opened a restaurant in a little place called Avondale on the other side of the Huey Long Bridge in near a place called Houma, Louisiana. They opened a classic diner roadhouse called Mosca's. It's still there. Chicken cacciatore, shrimp and oysters mosca, Italian wines, white tablecloths, Sinatra on the jukebox. It's great. A lot of people think a mob boss brought him in there. That's a legendary story. It's not true, but we understand that the New Orleans mob ate a lot of meals at Mosca because you dump the body in the swamps somewhere outside of New Orleans, and on the way back, you were very hungry from doing that, and you would stop off at Mosca's. Another group that settled in New Orleans that has been largely forgotten were the Yugoslavians. A lot of Yugoslavians, they were water people. They came from the Dalmatian coast of Croatia, and so they dominated the oyster, shrimp, fishing, and citrus farmers, all from that region. There was a wonderful old restaurant that's not there anymore in New Orleans called Yuglish's, which was a Yugoslavian restaurant that had amazing, amazing food there. Then who came later? The Vietnamese. A lot of the Vietnamese, after the fall of Saigon, settled in the New Orleans area. Why? They were fishermen. They were shrimpers. And they were ready to have their own boats. And so you've got this Vietnamese culture now that has blended the boat people in New Orleans. What are some of the signature dishes? God, where do you start? Well, po' boys. There was a strike, a streetcar strike in 1929, and there was some Italians called the Martin Brothers, and they created free sandwiches for the striking workers. And these striking workers were referred to as those poor boys, and hence the poor boy sandwich. I'm a big fan of seafood poor boys like fried shrimp or oysters or catfish, completely dressed, shaved lettuce, tomatoes, hot sauce. I'm a big fan of seafood poor boys, but they're famous also in New Orleans for roast beef, poor boys, and baked ham. There's a wonderful restaurant called Mother's in New Orleans that you should go to. They have the best baked ham with crunchy edges, and you get a baked ham poor boy there that's just really, really good. Up in Natchitoches, a lot of people call it Natchitoches. Natchitoches, they have meat pies. Again, that was from a group that had settled there of Germans intersecting with Creoles. They invented brunch in New Orleans. It's a place called Brennan's, which is very famous for their breakfast at Brennan's. You get a famous dessert dish called Bananas Foster. It was named for one of their customers that they made the dish for, Richard Foster. They were famous for their turtle soup and amazing egg dishes like egg Sardo or eggs Florentine or eggs St. Charles, and eggs Benedicts, obviously. They're famous for grits and grillades, veal strips like a veal schnitzel that's served with grits and a gravy. In many cases, it's like an Italian gravy, or in some cases, it's a brown gravy. I love that. Oysters Rockefeller. invented at Antoine's restaurant. Nobody knows the recipe. Everybody thinks it's spinach. They swear it's not. Everybody thinks it's watercress. They swear it's not. They won't tell anybody. But oysters Rockefeller is one of the great dishes ever. How about bread pudding? Bread pudding was leftover French bread. It got hard and dry. No problem. We're just going to pour a bunch of milk on it and a bunch of rum on it and a bunch of sauce on it and make bread pudding. And then they invented a chain restaurant called Popeye's Chicken. Popeye's Chicken out of New Orleans, a Cajun-style spicy brand of chicken. Boy, I could go on and on and on, and we will after the break. What else did they invent in New Orleans? Cocktails. The French invented the classic American cocktail. They have a wonderful cocktail called a French 75 at Arnaud's. Champagne, lime, and cognac. French 75. How about the Grasshopper? 2 Jacks, chocolate, mint liqueur, brandy, and heavy cream. At the Roosevelt Hotel is a famous bar called the Sazerac Bar. They invented the Sazerac there. Rye whiskey, herb saint, bitters, sugar, and lemon peel. How about Pat O'Brien's with a famous hurricane, citrus juices, rum, and grenadine. And then at the Hotel Monteleone, the Veuve Carré, the French Quarter dish cocktail, Benedictine, cognac, rye whiskey, and sweet vermouth. So many famous cocktails were invented in New Orleans. But probably the dish that best sums up all of Louisiana is gumbo. Gumbo is multi-cultures in a single pot. They're all types of gumbo. Everybody makes their gumbo a little bit different. There's Creole gumbo, there's Cajun gumbo. It's made in many cases with smoked meats or duck or sausages. In many cases, it's made with great seafood. I'm biased for what we call Creole gumbo. And Creole gumbo is probably the best I've ever had anywhere in the world, ever, is at the very famous Dooky Chase restaurant in Tremé, the Tremé section in New Orleans. Y'all, this is one of the great restaurants in America. Dooky Chase in New Orleans, the Tremé, the historic Black district. It's got an amazing history, a great pedigree, a great food. They opened their doors in 1941 with the idea that Black people should have nice restaurants, just like the white folks had up in the Garden District. And so from the day they opened, they were very cultured and very civilized. It originally was a sandwich shop where they sold lottery tickets. But in 1939, it became a thriving bar and later a respected family restaurant, again, in that Tremé section. It was founded by Emily and Dooky Chase Sr. And then their son, Dooky Chase Jr., who was a jazz musician, came back to work in the restaurant. And then he married a woman named Leah, the very famous matriarch, Leah Chase, who was probably one of the great American chefs ever. Dooky Chase has been this meeting place for music and entertainment, civil rights, and culture in New Orleans since the 1940s. Now, Dooky Jr. was a very successful jazz musician. But that's a tough life. You're on the road all the time. You're out and about. He had a 16-piece band, played, traditional swing and modern jazz music. His sister, Doris Chase, was a vocalist at one time. They were one of the most progressive bands in the South. They played a lot of bebop, like Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker. But he had his dad's entrepreneurial spirit. And at age 19, he promoted the first racially integrated concert in the old Municipal Auditorium in New Orleans. In 1946, as I mentioned, Edgar Dooker Chase Jr. married Leah Lang Chase. And through Leah's vision, the restaurant really grew and prospered, and it grew to be the most renowned sit-down restaurant, wrapped in this wonderful New Orleans African-American culture. When you come to Dooky Chase, they have amazing art on the wall that is for sale of great African-American artists, Creole artists. They're famous for their Creole cooking. Leah became known as the queen of Creole culture, Creole cuisine. Again, like I said, she began to showcase the culture and say it's something we ought to be proud of. Today, it's still family owned. Leah died, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago in her late 90s. They closed after Hurricane Katrina for a couple of years to rebuild, but with the assistance of so many loyal customers, they were able to come back and reopen. What I love about there is you'll be there with tourists for sure, because tourists like to come to New Orleans and eat there. But then there are regulars that eat there like, this is Thursday, I eat here for lunch every Thursday. And so you get that really kind of unique feel. It's always full of musicians. It's full of politicians. It's full of visual artists, literary giants. I mean, it is the gumbo you're going to eat is also the gumbo of the atmosphere of all these unique people that's there. You know, Beyonce's eating there, Jay-Z, Quincy Jones, Jesse Jackson, Duke Ellington, Thurgood Marshall, James Baldwin, Ray Charles, presidents like George Bush and Barack Obama have been there. Wonderful, wonderful people that have eaten at Dooky Chase's restaurant. Today, Duke the Fourth is the executive chef. He has a show on the Food Network that you can watch with Octavia Spencer, and he's great with her, and they talk about family food. They bring in families from around the country that create their family traditional recipes. Wonderful deal. When we were there with Duke, he cooked his grandmother's famous Creole gumbo. And y'all, when you watch the episode on our YouTube channel, you're going to see how he had all of the proteins and all the vegetables and how they made the stock. And I'm just telling you, I can't do it justice talking about it. You got to go to the video and let him walk you through his grandmother's Creole gumbo. It's just phenomenal. And I think you're going to really, really enjoy it. Leah Chase's famous Creole gumbo cooked by her grandson. It just doesn't get much better than that. The Chase family people, these are some of the best people I've ever met. I'm very fortunate that my dear friend Jessica Harris, who is probably the leading expert on the African diaspora food and African-American cuisine, introduced me to Dooky Chase years ago, as she has introduced me to so many other great restaurants in New Orleans, like the late Upper Line and others. I'm so grateful to her. She's just one of my favorite people in the world, and she has a special relationship with the Chase family. And again, we're talking about some great restaurants in this series. Folks, this is on your bucket list. If you haven't been to Dooky Chase in New Orleans, make plans right now to get to New Orleans and eat in this amazing, unique American institution, Dooky Chase's restaurant, Creole Gumbo. Well, listen, we're almost out of town. I could talk about Louisiana food all day. As I mentioned, I had that wonderful article called New Orleans on 6 Meals a Day. God, you could eat 20 meals a day in New Orleans. It's so good. So I'm gonna give you a quick 3 from me, and I'm leaving New Orleans because I could tell you about 4 dozen restaurants in New Orleans. But my other favorite city in the state of Louisiana is in Lafayette. I had the chance to spend a lot of time in Lafayette doing work at the university. My dear friend Tom Pierce introduced me to so many great places. My dear friend T-Boy Hebert has introduced me to so many wonderful restaurants in South Louisiana. But here are 3 of my favorite from Lafayette. The first one is called Charlie G's. Here's what you want at Charlie G's. You want the duck and andouille gumbo, and you want to tell them to add a crab cake on top. Duck andouille gumbo with a crab cake on top. Y'all, I'm just telling you, Charlie G's, one of the great restaurants. There's a place there called Coons. Don't you love that name? It's the breakfast place. You come in and get all kinds of great breakfast dishes, etouffees with eggs, beignets, French bread sandwiches, eggs everywhere. I love boudin. I'm a huge boudin guy. There's nothing better than boudin. Boudin is a sausage with rice in a casing. It's perfect for breakfast with eggs and grits. Doesn't get any better. Coons. And then my next one is the French Press. It's downtown Lafayette. It's the best brunch place. What do you want to eat there? It's called the Cajun Benedict. All right, here's what it is. Toasted French bread with a boudin patty, American cheese, 2 poached eggs, topped with chicken andouille gumbo, and then fried shrimp on top. Okay, yeah, it's a heart attack on a plate. Make sure that you take your cardiologist with you when you eat at the French Press, but it's worth it. Okay, now look, you're going to get in there and eat about 10:30 in the morning. You're going to eat it on Tuesday morning. You're not going to eat again till Saturday, but this is it. Again, guys, French bread, boudin, poached eggs, chicken and andouille gumbo, and fried shrimp on one dish. It's killer. Those are my 3 from me. We'll close by telling you, of course, we have a great musical playlist. It's Louisiana, for God's sakes. The first song is Walking to New Orleans from the great Fats Domino. The second is the classic American rock song by the Animals called The House of the Rising Sun, which is about a prison and not a whorehouse in New Orleans. Born on the Bayou from Creedence Clearwater Revival. The great Garth Brooks has a wonderful song called Calling Baton Rouge. And then my favorite song ever about Louisiana is the great Louis Armstrong with Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans? So let's close with the words from Jimmy Buffett, another great singer who spent a lot of time in New Orleans. As Jimmy says, and I say, I'll play for gumbo, especially at Dooky Chase. We'll see you next week back here from the great state of Indiana on United Taste of America.